So on this question, they are talking to us about, well, the new notation is that little -1 thing that's up there. And let me tell you what that means. So when they put f -1 like that, that means f inverse function. So that little -1 power on a function means the inverse function, which is the opposite function. And so let me make clear what we're talking about. So basically, if you have f of some input equals some output, like, because that's what functions do. In fact, yeah, let me write it this way. If you take a toaster, and here's the holes in the toaster. You put in bread to the toaster, you push down the levers, a minute later, out comes toast, right? So this is the input. I know this seems very rudimentary, but stick with me. This is basically what a function is. So for a toaster, you plug in bread, you get out toast, right? Well, that's now. What if they invented such a weird thing as an inverse toaster? Let me write that. Toaster to the -1 power. That would mean an inverse toaster. That's what that little -1 means. That would mean it's an opposite toaster. It does the opposite of what a toaster does. What does that mean? What do you mean the opposite of a toaster? Well, for a normal toaster, you put in bread, turns it into toast. Put in frozen waffles, turns it into toasted waffles, etc. Well, then for an inverse toaster, it would run things exactly the opposite direction. Meaning you would put in like toast, something that already was toast, and it would do what? Turn it back into bread, wouldn't it? Which is weird and nobody would want that. But you get the idea. Well, that's what an inverse function is going to do. It just reverses inputs and outputs. That's all an inverse function, a little -1 power on a function. It just means run it backwards, invert it, switch it up. So when they tell me right here, so let's go over and let's do this actual question now. When they tell me this is the input, right? They put a 9 into this f function, whatever it is, and out came an 8. Okay, great. So what? Well, now they're going to put an 8, that's now the input, into the inverse, the opposite of f, right? This is the inverse function right here, f inverse function. This is -1 power thing means inverse, right? So if you put in a 9 and you get out an 8 from the normal function, then vice versa, if you put an 8 into the inverse function, what's coming out? 9. The answer is 9. There's nothing to do. They're just making sure you understand the concept. There's nothing to add, subtract, multiply, or divide or really work out at all. There's just, oh yeah, it's just that. And then the same thing on the next part, right? Here is the input and out comes a -4. Well, then if you reverse that and you put in a -4, well, out will come the -8. -8, done. So again, there's nothing to work out. It's just making sure you understand that an inverse function just reverses the inputs and outputs of a normal function. Like an inverse toaster, if there was such a weird thing, would just reverse it, right? Put in toast, turns it back into bread, which nobody wants. So you get the idea. That's what an inverse function does. It switches inputs and outputs. And so there's nothing to do. Just switch them and write down the answer. There we go.